The Scream Kings are in no way responsible for any encounters with the paranormal, extraterrestrial abductions, eldritch insanity, hauntings, curses, hexes, demonic possessions, cryptozoological sightings, or any loss of sleep that results from listening to this podcast.
This is the Scream Kings podcast. I'm Nathaniel Darkish.
And hey, it's Max George.
Evil podcasts tonight.
Oh boy, everyone, thank you for returning. We've got evil abound in our lives, I feel like, lately, Nathaniel.
Or at least chaos. Oh, man.
We want to give a huge and very sincere apology to all of our listeners. Nathaniel and I have had quite the eventful last 2 months. Pazuzu really just decided he wanted to screw us all over. So, and not in fun ways.
Yeah. None of the fun of potential connotative meanings of that word. Instead, it's been various illnesses running through both of our households, some multiple times. All sorts of technical issues, which are still continuing. I am recording this using Bluetooth earbuds in my phone as opposed to my usual setup because, heaven forbid my web browser recognize my microphone. Just stuff like that. But that's just like scratching the surface. There's been career developments, and a lot of the stuff is actually good stuff. It's a lot, guys. But you've still been in our hearts and in our minds.
Yeah, and I think at the same time, we've had Halloween, and we both have kids with Halloween, so that always gets complicated. And then it felt like 2 weeks later, it was Thanksgiving all of a sudden. And then 'tis the season to be sick. It's just crazy.
Let's just say we're very glad to be back. We hopefully won't have delays like this again anytime soon. And even when we do have these delays, we still love you all, and we miss you dearly, and we miss podcasting. And, I don't know about you, but I at least have been consuming all sorts of really great other horror content, and so I'm like, oh man, I have 30 episodes I want to do now.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remind everybody too that this is definitely not a job for either of us. We love this podcast. We love the genre of horror. But sometimes life happens, and you and I, from the very beginning, have always, prioritized our families and life. So thank you again for everyone being patient. We're back!
And we will do our darndest to stay back without ridiculous delays again. But if they happen, know that it's just how it goes sometimes. All right, well, should we move into our first of two movies that we're going to be talking about today?
Oh, it's going to be a brutal podcast. We are returning with a vengeance.
Yes. So, yeah, not only are we going to be talking about two different movies today that are not really connected outside of both coming out around the same time, within a month or so of each other. We're not going to say nice things. Let's just put it that way. Just getting that up front. We're going to talk about two movies we don't like that are big, significant movies in the horror genre right now.
Both these movies came out around Halloween. So again, we're kind of throwing it back. But if there was a podcast version of a roast, this is going to be it, everyone. So we are going to lean into two movies, Malignant and the new Halloween.
Halloween kills.
And it killed me, for sure.
Yeah, it's bad horror movies roasting on an open fire tonight, guys. Oh, hey. Okay.
Whoa!
Yes. So, I guess let's kick things off with a discussion of Malignant, which I'll just say, I don't get why this movie is as beloved as it is in the horror community right now. Like, I feel like it's one of those movies that, like, a lot of horror fans are really rallying around and saying, like, oh, this is like the best horror movie of the year. And for all of you who feel that way, I have one question. It's, huh?
Yeah,
Because
so let's maybe give some context here. Malignant came out earlier this year. It's James Wan, isn't it?
yeah.
Uh, and the trailers to this movie really built it up to be something pretty spooky, I think. When you watch the trailers for Malignant, you get excited. The horror tingles inside of you kind of start to come out. And yeah, I just am so confused. I don't even know where to start, Nathaniel. This movie, I think, tries so hard to kind of crack open cult culture and be something that fans have adored, from like Evil Dead, kind of this over-the-top campy movie. But it's trying so damn hard that it just comes off kind of nauseating, really.
Yes. So there is a glowing review for this movie that I found on IMDb, like, and that I unironically loves this movie, but I think just the title of their review perfectly captures why I think both you and I are just like, this is just too much of a movie. It describes it as a murder mystery 80s slasher kung fu sci-fi body horror B-movie splatter comedy. Which,
yeah, so
it is all of those things. And
all
I
at
think
once.
that is way too many things. I'm okay with, like, most of those things individually. In fact, I'm great with all of those things individually. And I'm great with a combination of, like, 3 or 4 of those things, but that was like 7 things, guys. Like, I like some really bonkers stuff, but it was so much. It was so much.
Yeah, so a little kind of background about the movie again. It's about a main character, a woman, who I'm still very iffy on the details. She almost feels like that there is something that kind of invades her house. It kills a very abusive husband, who we can talk about that in a minute. But then this entity inside the house almost seems to start to possess her. It feels very much like a demonic possession movie for the first third.
But also, like she has some sort of, like, psychic connection to some sort of serial killer, and that's all ignoring the cold open that made basically no sense. That was set, many years before, and it's just like doctors screaming and running away from some angry child in a mental hospital, and it's very unclear what the hell is going on in that scene.
Yeah, and to save us all time and energy, really what ends up happening is this entity is somehow like a conjoined twin that's living inside her and slowly from the inside out beginning to control this poor woman and make her do all these unthinkable things. So you throw out the first 2/3 of the movie where it's building up about demonic possession and even like
Or a
the
psychic
weird
connection.
yeah, or even like extrasensory kind of mediumship to some extent. It all throws it out, and it becomes this weird campy slasher, and the poor character's face like splits apart, and then it's the weird twin, and then somehow she gets superpowers and can do all sorts of stuff. It's just so wild. It is so wild.
And also, like, she's, like, moving backwards, and somehow her body works that way as she's, like, moving backwards. And it's all related to a stay in a mental hospital in the past, and it is so much going on. And, okay, so, like, some things that I think that this movie is... This movie is exactly the kind of movie that it wants to be. Like, James Wan is clearly made this movie to be a love letter to, like, Italian giallo films, which
Definitely
tend to be absolutely bonkers. It's definitely lots of just, kung fu tributes and splatter comedy tributes and everything else. Like, it's a lot of just like the most over the top campy ideas in horror. You know, it's him writing a love letter to all of those things. But again, I think because it's so many things, any of the individual parts that like should have been, that I should have been able to pluck out and just go, oh well, at least this idea is kind of interesting, even though I don't like how it comes together as a whole. None of them work because, well, kind of like you're getting at, like earlier on in the film, it was very clearly like setting up like some possession stuff, and then also like she is in her home and then like gets a vision of someone getting murdered. But then later on in the film, apparently she was the one doing the murdering, which isn't how space and time work. Things like that, where it's just like she is there doing these things, but she isn't there. So how is that working? So like it's one of those, like, the more you look at kind of the twists and turns of the story, the less everything that happened before makes any sense at all.
Yeah, and I can fully understand why people to some extent like this movie. It is a love letter to a lot of the fun, campy things about horror that have continued through the years. Like you just said, I think really the Achilles heel of Malignant is it tries to cram it in to this giant mess of a ball and then shove it down your throat. Within the first 15 minutes, I mentioned earlier this abusive husband. The main character goes up and he's in the bedroom and they're kind of having this little romantic chitty chat. And then she talks about the baby that she's pregnant with, and all of a sudden he just like completely flips and just leans into her about her like losing the babies before. And it was jarring because it felt so forced, so random, and just not present in what we were focused on at the time. And I think that really set the stage for the rest of the movie. It has these moments where you're like, okay, maybe it's reining itself in, maybe it's pulling together, and then it just jumps to 90 miles an hour. And it just is jarring and uncomfortable. And I don't know, for me, as a horror critic, it made me bored. I just didn't care anymore. The characters are dumb. The villain is dumb. The whole damn movie is dumb.
Yeah, I definitely agree that was unfortunately, where I went to. Like, instead of the fun, ride that a lot of, like, really bonkers movies take me on, like anything by Sam Raimi, for example.
Yeah, right.
Like,
Drag Me to Hell,
Yeah, Drag Me to Hell, the Evil Dead movies, Darkman, whatever. Like, I can go along for the ride. Like, not all of them are super my bag. I love me Evil Dead. I think Darkman is pretty decent. I didn't really like Drag Me to Hell, but even still, I had fun with it, even though I was just kind of about it at the end of the day. But this movie didn't even really let me have fun because, again, I just felt like whenever things started to get interesting in one plot thread, it was like someone changing the channel. And for some reason, all of the sets and the characters look the same, but it's a different movie now. And then flipping the channel, occasionally going back to the first channel, flipping the channel again. And so it didn't feel like it was one story. It wasn't cohesive. It was so off the wall, hard to understand. Yeah, that it wasn't fun or entertaining for me. I just, very quickly, like, started, like, playing on my phone, which, I mean, is not great for me trying to review a movie, but, like, it was the only way that I even got through it.
Yeah, and for me, I fell asleep. I don't fall asleep in movies. I love movies. It's how I kind of cope with the world. One of my, big hobbies. And so to fall asleep in a movie for me is kind of a big deal. Overall, I think this movie, we're talking a lot about how it's just kind of a rambling mess. To some extent, I can see why people enjoyed that. I have a dear friend of mine who is a big fan of the podcast. She's been on the podcast, and she adores this movie. She thinks it's a hoot. But for her, she doesn't love it because it's a good movie. She loves it so much because it's such a bad movie. And I'm gonna have to admit that there's, some power to that. There are certain movies out there that are so bad they start to become good. But for me, there has to be something redeeming about the movie. The storytelling has to be creative. The plot has to be fun. There has to be some element that makes me care. And Malignant, just by a third of it in, I just did not care. If I'm honest, and I had not known about the movie or had watched the trailers leading up to this, and had it not been on HBO, for Pete's sake, I would have thought this was a B movie, a B-Reel movie. Like, that description you gave just a few minutes ago.
Some bonkers movie that I would have made
Yeah, and it kind of was. I mean, Lamageddon sounds more cohesive than this piece of shit.
Yeah. I'm going to take it up one step further. This movie was so bad to me that I have actually gotten to the point that I just went, I think maybe James Wan is bad at making movies, and that The Conjuring and Conjuring 2 are good by some sort of weird cosmic mistake. But because Malignant is very aggressively bad, and Aquaman was aggressively bad, and the first Saw movie was pretty good, but again, that might have been a huge fluke. This movie reminded me a lot in terms of its bonkersness and its tone to Dead Silence, which I didn't like, but it's like Dead Silence if Dead Silence was literally on acid. And so to me, I kind of just don't think James Wan is the it guy in horror that I think we've all believed he has been. I would say the Conjuring movies have maybe deceived us. And the good parts of Insidious. Insidious was great until it wasn't. This movie was just the bad stuff in Insidious shoved together with weird, giallo tropes.
Yeah, I think this is something that we need to kind of focus in on a little bit here is, we have talked a lot about how we can tell when horror movies care. When the directors and the actors in a horror movie really are invested in the storytelling, it's very apparent when you watch it. A movie that comes to mind that does this really exceptionally, I think, is Invisible Man, that came out right before the pandemic hit. Overall,
by his writing partner Lee Whannell.
Yeah. Invisible Man to me wasn't an amazingly perfect movie, but the plot was committed, the characters were committed, and you could tell that it had a purpose. It was trying to accomplish something. And James Wan, I think, did that in Conjuring 1 and Conjuring 2, but also I think he was kind of constrained to the Warrens' telling of the story. Factual inaccuracies aside, Conjuring 1 and Conjuring 2 are pretty relatively, grounded in the stories that the Warrens told about these two families.
Yeah.
In Conjuring 2, you have the creepy, I can't even remember his name, Spring Hill Jack or whatever, that demon that I'm sure will get
the Crooked Man.
Crooked Man, thank you. And then we also have the nun, who kind of is a superfluous addition, but, was a fun, spooky monster. But again, those two movies had that purpose and had that drive, and were grounded in a story that Wan couldn't really modify. He could, but he chose not to. And executed two very well movies. And then you kind of shift to this piece of crap, and then also Conjuring 3.
Well, he didn't do Conjuring 3 is the thing. And so to me, Conjuring 3, I was like, oh, maybe, James Wan, leaving the series was, to the detriment of the Conjuring verse. And now, having seen Malignant, I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
I it's just such a bad movie.
And plot point aside, the cinematography was also really weird. There's that crazy jail scene where there's this character who she's dressed like she's in the 70s, and it just feels super displaced. And I'm all for some 70s fashion, but it needs to make sense in the world. It just this. If I had to sum it up, this movie just does not make sense at all. The plot, the storytelling, the characters, the horror, it's just a dumpster fire.
Yeah. And it has so much potential, but it just like fundamentally rejects like how human bodies work, time works, mental health works. And like again, I am very willing to suspend a lot of my disbelief.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's
freaking parkoured over that and ran as far as it could.
It literally parkoured over that. Yeah, suspending belief is important. You know, I'm very for that, and a lot of times I get pretty frustrated with people who, when they're watching a movie, especially something in the fantasy or the sci-fi, the horror realm, and they call out like factual inaccuracies of like, oh, that can't happen or whatever. Sure. Like, you gotta suspend your belief, but this movie requires you to completely reject that. And I think that's inherently wrong. It does have to be grounded. This movie is not grounded.
Yeah, there has to be some rules to the world. And it seems like whenever I thought I had a grasp on what the rules of this cinematic universe is, it just went, haha, just kidding. Nothing that you saw actually was real at all.
It pooped the bed, as you're so famously known for saying.
Yeah, but it did it like 17 times, which is a new record.
No one wants to clean that bed. All right, well, I will
say, wait, I want to say one good thing about it. I actually laughed out loud when it had the line, oh, okay, so I'll put a bolo out for Sloth from the Goonies, when she like draws, you know, the mysterious monster man. For the cops. Just that line actually like got me back invested for like 3 seconds because I laughed, and then it went back to just being terrible again.
Can we talk about those caricatures of cops and how they were just so asinine and pathetic? And I felt like mall cop Paul Blart hired the two of them.
I think Paul Blart Mall Cop would have been at least slightly more accurate in terms of how police work works.
Right. My probably least favorite moment was after our poor protagonist like is taken over by the twin or whatever, and just goes on like some psychopathic murder rampage, and then she wakes up in the hospital and she has this realization like, oh, that couldn't have been me, but it was me the whole time. So this just like normal human woman was able to parkour, and I keep talking about it and it just makes it more ridiculous, so I'm gonna stop.
Yeah. And also I will say that like, you know, I have you know, like coworkers who we always like to talk about horror movies, you know, like some of these coworkers I like went and saw Dr. Sleep with when it was in theaters and stuff like that. Literally like 2 days ago, I was having a conversation with one of them, and she was like, hey, by the way, have you seen Malignant? And I'm like, yes. And she's like, it was bad, right? And I'm like, it was so bad. And that was the whole conversation. So what do you give it, screams and crowns wise?
All right, as far as screams go, I gave it a 2. There were moments, little flickers.
Yeah, there was some pretty creepy looking goopy nonsense. And for that, I also gave it a 2. Everything else was just so stupid I didn't get scared.
Yeah, I was never scared or spooky, but I can appreciate, you know, a well creative horror moment.
Yeah, and I would just say mostly the goopy looking face on the back of her head was pretty disgusting.
Yeah.
And that earned that whole 2. Crowns wise, I gave it a 2 again. Just, you know, it's not a good movie. It could be worse, but it would be a stretch.
I also gave it a 2. I do not care for this movie. I started out giving it a 1, but the movie we're about to review next, I think, is even worse. So I'll let that be.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, before we jump into our next movie that we're going to roast, Halloween Kills, Let's have a nice palate cleanser. A B-Reel game.
We need
because
like a theme
it's helpful
song for these.
You know what? Challenge accepted. This one's gonna have a theme song now.
Perfect.
So our theme for the B-Reel game is Amityville.
Oh no. Oh, this might be detrimental to you. I know my Amity movies pretty well, so we'll see. Bring it on.
Let's just say I'm gonna have ones, and then I'm going to proceed to read off a list of other ones that exist that I didn't include on the list that are even crazier.
Oh boy.
Because even I have limits. So our first film is titled Amityville Butcher Shop. A butcher shop is built on the lot where the Amityville horror house has been torn down, but evil seeps up through the soil and into the butcher and his meats. Soon, a cleaver-wielding maniac cuts through the town house by house, while possessed steaks, ropes of sausage, and a vengeful haggis trap families inside. Overall score? What?
I will kill if you do not get me a shirt for Christmas that says Vengeful Haggis.
Oh, I already have your Christmas present. But
continue.
What makes you think that this one's mine? The score here is 1.8 out of 10.
Oh, no.
And the review I found for it gave it a 2 out of 10 and said, not even Gordon Ramsay could manage to make this tasteless Amityville knockoff worth consuming.
Oh, no.
All right.
All right. Cool.
Our next one is Amityville Clown House. 40 years after the original Amityville murders, a cursed antique toy finds its way to a brand new family who become the latest victims of possession in the undying legacy of evil. Overall score is 2.2 out of 10, and the review gave it 1 out of 10 and said, the director should be ashamed of himself. This movie made me dumber watching it and gave me eye cancer. Or is it Amityville Toy Box? A cursed antique toy monkey from the original DeFeo home wreaks havoc and possesses a father after being gifted during the annual family reunion. Score 2.1 out of 10, and the review gave it 2 out of 10, and the review simply just said, just for this movie, I made an account to warn all.
These movies make me feel like I can do it. Like, I've always wanted to be a movie director, and if people have directed these and have created these things, like, why can't I?
It's a fair question.
All right.
So, is our fake one the butcher shop that Gordon Ramsay couldn't even manage to save? The clown house that gave the viewer eye cancer? Or the toy box that warranted making an IMDb account just to warn people about it?
I feel the burn. And not the Bernie Sanders burn. Okay, my deduction skills here are solely based on the phrase eye cancer. That feels like a very Nathaniel phrase, so I'm guessing the second movie.
I win!
Woohoo! What one was it?
The Butcher Shop.
Oh, Vengeful Haggis! Dang it!
The Vengeful Haggis. So do you want to hear even worse movies that I did not include in my Amityville B-Reel game?
Oh, I do and I don't at the same time. But tell me.
Now, some of these haven't come out yet, so, things to look forward to.
Oh, Lord.
So, on the tamer end, we have things like Amityville 1992, It's About Time, or Amityville Cop, or Amityville Uprising, or Vampire, or Cult, or Scarecrow, or Island, or Asylum, or No Escape, or Dollhouse, or the Amityville Hex, or the Amityville Harvest, or the Amityville Shark House. Or if we want to get really interesting, Amityville Bigfoot, Amityville Karen, Amityville Vampire, the Amityville Vibrator, which came out that one came out last year. There's so many of them. It's honestly just, if you type Amityville in IMDb and then just scroll and scroll and scroll, there are so many.
I do have to congratulate you where congratulations are needed. You finally bested me, Nathaniel.
Yes, it's been a very long time. I've only bested you one other time, but I did it.
Congratulations.
I feel so good. I needed that. And now
we're gonna need some laughs.
Get through Halloween Kills.
Oh boy. Okay. Where do we even start with this one? There is this thing going on right now in cinema where I think horror fans, there's this renaissance to some extent of old horror films being revitalized. Halloween, I think, was a pretty big one. We have the Scream movie coming out, I believe, early this coming year.
Yeah, it's in January, and I cannot wait.
Halloween is not my favorite horror movie. I have to admit that. The original, yes, Jamie Lee Curtis, Michael Myers, the whole shebang. It's a classic, and I appreciate it for what it's for. It's iconic. Michael Myers is iconic. Jamie Lee Curtis is iconic. And I think the movie really kind of set the stage for our modern day slashers. I mean, we could get into that whole debacle. So I'm going to give Halloween credit where credit is due.
Yes, it's an important movie, even if it doesn't necessarily speak to either of us.
Sure. With that said, I do not understand this whole damn franchise. I struggle with slasher movies. I will be the first to admit it. I will go to a convention about it. Slasher movies, to me, I struggle with because it's rare to me that I find a slasher movie where the slasher is human, where it's fully human. It has weaknesses, can be defeated.
And to me, yeah, like that often is what makes for a slasher to be appealing. Like, that's why I love the Scream franchise so much, is because they are very fallible villains, and also like it plays with the tropes of the genre in such interesting ways. But yeah, I agree. Like, Halloween is hard for me to get invested in because, especially with most of the sequels out there, it just, like, it doesn't matter what happens because he's just going to kill everybody. And to me, a cool death isn't really as appealing as, other things that you see in other horror movies.
So Halloween Kills is a direct kind of sequel from the remake Halloween.
Or the sequel with the reboot name, I don't know. Whatever you want to call it.
So it quickly follows Jamie Lee Curtis and her family. They think they've killed Michael Myers by burning down the house, and they're all headed to the hospital to kind of recover. They did it. They finally killed Michael. But surprise! Michael somehow survives an entire house burning down. Not only that, he then escapes from the burning house, still, like, fully cognizant and not suffering from smoke damage whatsoever. I have a very good friend who was staying at a hotel, and the hotel basement caught fire, and he may have, inhaled perhaps 10 minutes of smoke fire, and he's still suffering consequences from it. There's no way in hell Michael Myers was surviving. Anyway, that's a side rant.
And not just surviving, but then proceeds to murder, 47 people.
Yeah, not just surviving, he's thriving! He is living his best life. His mask gets spookier, and he, like, murders and goes to town on a team of firefighters and just massacres them. And
because,
then,
heaven forbid, any of them, like, come at him at the same time. He fights them one at a time.
and this is where the movie just kind of explodes.
Which is literally, like, 3 minutes in.
I despised this movie. I saw it in theaters, and I was pretty pissed about it because I don't understand why everyone loves the Halloween franchise so much, and this movie in particular was literally just pandering to audience. There were tons and tons of these weird rando cameos from other movies in the franchise, but this is supposed to be, like, outside of the franchise, so the timeline... this is a direct sequel from the original, but all of these extra characters who happened in the sequels somehow still exist in this universe?
Yeah, there's lots of stuff. Or it's like, oh, hey, they were a small child in the first one, and so now they're, a 60-year-old man and, shouting, evil dies tonight over and over again and rallying the troops. And I'm like, because they all live in the same town still... They all still regularly hang out. They all haven't let anything meaningful else happen in their lives. Any of them. Like, I get it. Like, some people, they have something traumatic like this, and it defines their whole life. And that's very unfortunate, and that is real. But that's not everybody. And I just hate that it's, like, every single character in this one.
Yes, and so this movie... The protagonist really is Michael Myers. Michael is kind of the star of everything. You have this group of renegades who are finally sick and tired of the reign of Michael. And so they're hellbent on finding him and killing him. Also, while not telling Jamie Lee Curtis, because, that would make sense. And so as the movie progresses, you start to kind of feel this weird political subplot start to develop about, like, fake news and police aren't doing what the public wants, so we'll take matters into our own hands, and evil dies tonight being chanted over and over and over. It for me, when I was watching it in the theaters, for a moment I was kind of enthralled to some extent because I was getting some strong Assault on the Capitol January vibes. It felt like there was a message at play here, that they were trying to convey that this is the terrifying nature of these riots. That when certain people get hell-bent on their ideas and start to, push those ideas through, there's nothing we can do. And that's terrifying.
And I definitely think that was woven in, but to me that felt like a last-minute, like, message that they tried to, like, just tack in post. They found a way to kind of bend it around that because it didn't feel, like, authentic to the plot, because these are also supposed to be our heroes that we're cheering for, except for then now we're not supposed to cheer for them anymore because they, like, do some really heinous stuff and chase a, mental patient to committing suicide in a hospital, which, again, also just, that's okay. I guess that happened. It's just like it felt like they said, oh, well, I guess the mob mentality of this has the potential to relate to the riots, I guess. So let's find a way to kind of tack that in. But also, we still want to cheer for these people, even though we're going to have them do some really horrendous crap over the course of this movie. And also, no one is capable of doing anything. I don't know why these people think that they can, take down Michael when they aren't smart enough to figure out that if someone is on the roof of your car, you shoot into the roof and not just shoot out all of the windows at the thing above you.
This whole political subplot, it was going somewhere, and then it just stopped. And I don't know if they were trying to make you feel compassion for these titular characters and these, like, franchised characters, but it was just worthless. I was rooting for Michael the entire time because at least he was getting shit done.
I think another thing that's interesting to point out is that the way that everyone in this town is reacting to Michael and the idea of Michael, and that they're all chanting "Evil dies tonight" and all of that, they're reacting to him as though the 8 zillion other Halloween movies existed. But in this canon, he had the Halloween night in the 70s, and then he had the night that was just earlier that night that he killed like 4 people.
Right.
And then proceeds to kill like 80 more people over the course of this movie. And it's like, not any of that, like, it just seems like a real insane overreaction. And some people are going to do that, but like, they're acting like, freaking Hitler just entered this place. Not a guy who, admittedly, is a horrifying human being who murdered, 10 people, but that's over the course of 40 years. And most of, and half those murders were 40 years ago. That's, I don't know, it didn't feel like the inherent basis of it was, like, an appropriate response.
Yeah, and furthermore, I think another huge weakness of this movie is the trailers made Jamie Lee Curtis feel like, again, this heroine who's going to come and save the day. The bitch was hardly in the movie, Nathaniel.
Yeah, she was basically in a hospital bed the whole time, and that's fine if you're gonna... But don't sell her as the protagonist if she's, like, really just waiting for the third movie.
Yeah, it just was a huge disservice. I would have loved kind of that moment again where it's Jamie Lee Curtis versus Michael Myers, and there's this huge confrontation, and maybe, just maybe, she finally kills him herself. She sacrifices some of her humanity to kill this monster. I think that's very provocative, but instead we get these whitewashed caricature, cookie cutter kind of hicks who have no depth and no compassion. I just did not care about anybody. Especially as a queer individual, there's a scene where Michael Myers comes into this gay couple's house. They live in the original Michael Myers house, and
Big John and Little John, because that's the most clever thing that they could come up with.
Oh, it was so distasteful. It felt like that trope of, here's this marginalized group of individuals, we're going to tokenize them and kill them. We had the black couple in the beginning of the movie. Michael kills them. They are completely helpless to Michael. And then where do we go
all
next?
Of these characters are cannon fodder.
Yeah, where do we go next? We go to the gay couple, and what does Michael do? Just decimates them. They have no chance. The only people who had a chance against Michael were the cis, hetero, white people, and I hated that. Ooh, I'm scathing.
And also, I think what makes it so unfortunate with, Big John and Little John is that they were the comic relief in the movie up until that point.
Right.
So they are the token gays to laugh at and then watch get brutally murdered. It felt like some sort of diversity for diversity's sake, but also like, hey, I just need to kill a bunch of people, and so, we'll care about them more in today's political climate. So we'll feel bad that the silly gays that we laughed at are dead now. Like that. What kind of reductive, insane nonsense is that?
Right. But I think that sells. That is the tragedy of movies like this. I could go on and on with this dumb movie. The next point I want to talk about, though, is kind of what we discussed earlier, is Michael ascends his mortal bounds. Towards the end of the movie, the villagers finally seemingly kill him. And then Jamie Lee Curtis has this wish-washy monologue about how evil can never die and evil begets evil, and every time Michael kills, it's just evil growing stronger and stronger. And sure, the idea that evil begets evil is pretty cool in some extent. And again, if we go back to the original Halloween franchise, you have the Curse of the Thorn and kind of this backstory of Michael of why he kills and the reasons why he kills and the reason why he is seemingly supernatural. But we're suspending all of that because this is a direct sequel. So Michaels is literally just a guy. But somehow he gets, curb stomped by this mob and stabbed and assaulted and killed. But then he stands back up and he gets his revenge because evil can't die. Ah! I need a drink.
And like, inherently, like, it seemed like what it was doing, it was, it seemed to be saying, hey, the evil that's happening tonight is going to create a new monster. And so that actually kind of would have been interesting, that basically if they, the fact that they kill Michael as a mob and all that then could result in and Halloween ends not actually having Michael but having someone inspired by the bad things that happened that night. That's what it seemed like it was setting up with that weird monologue that Jamie Lee Curtis has and all of that, but it wasn't. Instead it just was like, oh, well, it's actually not about you at all, like, you matter so little to him. And she's like, well, I'm gonna hunt him down anyway, and then he runs off into the woods or something. I don't know. It's weird. It undoes everything that the previous movie does, and nothing that happens in this movie actually matters. And I don't know. Yeah, like, it's just
garbage.
It was just filling time for 2 hours to set up a third movie and an arbitrary set of sequels. And what really bums me out about this, like, more than anything else, is I thought that the 2018 Halloween actually was okay. Like, I didn't love it, but I at least had, like, an okay experience with it. I actually, in terms of, like, the things I'm looking for in a horror movie, actually was kind of more on board with it than the original Halloween, and I know that is going to get me some flack. But, like, just pure entertainment, I was like, oh, like, hey, there's some interesting ideas in this one. I felt like the reliance on having, quirky podcasters investigating everything, which is in everything these days, that made me roll my eyes and all of that. But, like, as a whole, I don't know, I'd give Halloween 2018 like a 6 or a 7 overall. Like, I had fun with it. And this movie was just, like, I don't know if I still can wrap my head around the idea that, like, this is the same director who made that one.
Yeah.
What?
What is going on? Where are good horror movies?
Yeah, I'm just so baffled.
It has not been a kind year to horror, I don't think.
There have been gems, and I think that there's some really good horror in that is out there that isn't, just in the realm of film or things like that. Like, I would say that the big budget, big name horror that, was the spectacle that everyone went to go see, that's where we've had some big gaps in quality this year.
Big old flops. Last thing I want to say is the dialogue in this movie was absolute cringe. If cringe was any sort of something like Fringe and how gross Fringe is, this is how the cringe. Oh, this movie.
It's like if bad stilted dialogue could give you syphilis, you would definitely have syphilis.
Oh gosh. And I think, we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, Nathaniel. There is, Malignant and Halloween Kills are kind of in the same realm. They're very terrible horror movies. But for me, I was more offended by Halloween Kills than I was Malignant. I hate Malignant, but I loathe Halloween Kills. And I think the reason behind that is Malignant at least tried to be unique and creative. It failed at that. Halloween Kills, to me, was kind of an affront of everything creative and original horror is about. It just did not care. It did not care about being good. It solely relied on these actors that people have watched throughout the years. It solely relied on a monster who's grown to be iconic. It had zero substance for me. And I I'm sorry, but if you like this movie, I would question your taste a little bit, because it didn't do anything to merit my respect. I said it. There, I said it.
That said, if you love these movies, I actually want to hear why.
Agreed. Fair.
Make your argument. Come at us on Twitter, because I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying I don't get it. Like, I don't. Yeah, to me, this is the bottom rung of good horror. But thankfully, on the other end of it, we had Midnight Mass. So
Yes.
So it was a great year for horror, just not the big budget stuff.
Not yet, at least. I haven't watched Antlers yet, but I haven't been hearing the great things about that one either.
I've heard very mixed things. I hope it's good. But,
All right, well, if you're still with us after this huge long rant, thank you.
Wait. We haven't given it Screams and Crowns yet.
Oh, that's right. We have to at least credit it. Oh, boy.
So, how many Screams did you give Halloween Kills?
Also gave it a 2. Michael himself is very intimidating and scary. More so than that, the music coupled with his mask and just kind of his dominance that he portrays on screen is pretty frightening. And whether that is kind of a nostalgic kind of trigger, I don't care. It still kind of got under my skin. That's why I gave it a 2 and not a 1. Because that theme song coupled with him just staring in the distance is always going to kind of get under my skin.
That's fair. I gave it a 4 for very similar reasons. I would say, there are a few moments that were pretty genuinely scary. Unfortunately, those moments were during the movie Halloween Kills.
Oh, Crowns. I gave it a flop. I gave it a 1. Straight up 1. I do not like this movie. I do not like it at all.
What? I thought you loved it from their review.
Yeah. One of the worst horror movies, I would have to say, that I've seen. And ask my boyfriend. I was like audibly groaning the entire movie. I think he hit me at one point because I was just like, ugh, in the movie theater with everyone around. I feel a little bad for that. Sorry, people who watched the movie with me.
I gave it a 3, not because it's necessarily any better than Malignant. It's just that it's the kind of trash that I can at least follow the plot of. But, again, that's a 3 out of 10. That's not good. Now, we can lay this roast to rest.
In the name of Lucifer Satan, amen.
How have you been saying spooky lately?
These movies that I've watched recently have kind of killed my horror buzz a little bit to some extent, which is a little sad. However, I believe I've mentioned this before in the past. There is a really fun, kind of queer-oriented show on Shudder. It's called Dragula. And if you're fans of RuPaul's Drag Race, Dragula takes that concept, so high conceptual fashion drag queens, and makes it horror. So they're all very, very spooky. They lean into kind of the horror themes, but it's really cool as well because this show, as opposed to RuPaul, which is a little bit more mainstream queer, this really accepts all forms of drag. So you have the horror drag, but you also have AFAB drag, which is female assigned at birth. So females impersonating drag females, which is, you don't really hear that very often. They also have like straight individuals doing drag. It's more about the art of drag through the lens of horror than it is about sassy gay men dressing up in drag, if that makes sense. It's very provocative. It's also very campy and cheesy. You've been warned. But recently that's kind of my main focus when it comes to horror. There are some really cool artists on the show right now who have done some really incredible artistic moments through horror. The second thing that I've been doing to stay spooky, and bear with me here on this one, there's a little Netflix cartoon called Centaur World. And this show is absolutely bonkers. The writers of it had to have been high and on cocaine at the exact same time. It is kind of this comedic cartoon that is very tongue-in-cheek and very silly. You know, the first few episodes, there's a lot of like fart jokes and poop humor, this and that. But it has some incredible music that kind of keeps adult audiences in tune with it. And then, as the story continues, it takes this terrifying, dark turn, and the villain is revealed, and he's just this absolutely terrifying cartoon creature, and the plot just becomes very adult-focused, and you're just like, whoa, wait, what happened? It's just really fun and crazy and a nice palate cleanser. Still kind of spooky horror-esque. So that's what I've been doing.
I'll have to take your word for that, because looking at the photos of this, it looks...
It's so like deceiving! Of everything you... I know, of everything you stand for, Nathaniel. But I swear, it is like up there with Over the Garden Wall and Gravity Falls in terms of like well-developed, like compelling cartoon storytelling.
I will give it a try, even though it looks like... not at all my kind of thing.
Yeah, I get that.
Well, just finding weirder pictures. Okay, I've been saying spooky, apparently just by learning about Centaur World. No, so I've been playing some horror video games lately. So I recently played through Resident Evil Village, which was a great time. Definitely not as strong of an entry in the series as, you know, like Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, the one that came right before it. That one is perfection. Or even like Resident Evil 4, which, by the way, just came out on VR, which looks incredible and on VR. But Village was a lot of fun. It had some really fun twists and turns. It's really kind of rewarding for longtime fans of the Resident Evil series because it does throw you so many curveballs. I mean, it's got vampires, it's got a creepy doll, it's got all sorts of weird crap in it, and it's a fun time. And like most of it wasn't that scary. It was just kind of fun, creepy horror rollicking through, you know, a weird Eastern European village. But there is that doll section that I mentioned.
Oh, it's terrible. Oh, I hate it. I hate it.
Especially just the things that happen in that basement of that house. Oh, good heaven. It felt like all of the best parts of, like, Silent Hill 4 and Amnesia. And, oh, it was upsetting. It definitely took a real dark turn in that section of the story, and I was there for it. I've also been playing through The Last of Us Part 2. I love the original Last of Us. I know Part 2 has gotten a lot of people angry, but I think it's mostly because they kill a significant character in the very first start. That's like the whole premise of the second one. I'm okay with that because, you know, sometimes that's how stories go. You don't always get to have all your favorite characters around the whole time. But that said, like, I feel like it has some really interesting twists and turns. It's very masterfully told. It's a gorgeous game. It's disturbing and creepy and hard, and, you know, it's a good time. I'm really enjoying it. I'm about a third of the way through it right now. It's also a fairly lengthy game, and yeah, I definitely intend to beat it, and I'm really enjoying my playthrough of that. Not on the horror video game side of things, but rather in the horror books side. I just listened to the audiobook of a collection, I guess. It's two Tales of Cosmic Horror by John Horner Jacobs. So the book is called A Lush and Seething Hell. It came out in 2019. And so, yeah, it's two novellas. The first one is called The Sea Dreams It Is the Sky. And then the second one is My Heart Struck Sorrow. The Sea Dreams That It Is the Sky was a pretty good story. It's kind of this weird, kind of paranoid, cosmic horror light story that is basically about a young woman who escaped a South American country after a bloody coup, going back there because her friend, who was a big important poet there, went back and hasn't come back after a year. Her kind of hunting for him. That one's fun. Definitely has kind of very creepy men in dark suits following her around sort of stuff going on. It's a good time. The second story, though, the story called My Heart Struck Sorrow, absolutely floored me. It is honestly some of the best horror I've read in the last 10 years. It is basically about a folklorist looking into kind of local blues songs and bluegrass and just very folk music, and looking for this folk song that maybe is evil or powerful or both. And the closer he gets to the original version of that song, the more deeply upsetting it gets.
This sounds like my jam. I need this book.
Yes. I'm not going to spoil anything for My Heart Struck Sorrow, but suffice it to say, some of the scenes in it just got under my skin in ways that I don't think anything I've read in horror has in a long time. It was disturbing and trippy and just viscerally upsetting. It is so good.
Yeah, I love that.
I cannot recommend it enough.
And they're both really good on audio. The readers are very good at what they do. So, highly recommend it. Easily, 10 out of 10 would recommend.
Awesome. Well, definitely stay tuned. Our holiday break is officially over. We will be back shortly with a new episode, hopefully themed around our lovely Christmas time. Saturnalia deserves some horror as well.
Yes, and there's a whole giant realm of Saturnalia, Christmassy, wintry horror out there that we've only barely scratched the surface of, so stay tuned. And until next time, stay spooky.
Stay spooky.
Need even more Scream Kings? Here's our obligatory shameless social media plug. Follow us on Twitter or Instagram at Scream Kings Pod. You could also email us at screamkingspodcast@gmail.com. Help us reach a wider audience of horror fans by leaving a review on iTunes or by sharing a link on social media. You can also support the show by going to patreon.com/Scream Kings. Stay spooky.